So yesterday in your keynote at Fluent, you asked the audience at one point who uses NPM every day, and basically the whole audience, every hand went up. So in the evolution of NPM going from a tool for Node developers and JavaScript developers to more of a platform for the wider community, how have you seen that evolve?
It's been really interesting because it was so accidental. One of the things that I said in the keynote yesterday is that we just try and get out of your way. So it happened through tooling. Basically, people were using Node to build command line tools. Like, the thing that Node was really good at was building command line tools at the beginning, mostly because Isaac was building NPM in Node, and so every time he needed to add a feature to NPM, he would add features to Node to make it possible to write NPM. So a lot of command line, it's really good at writing command line tools, and so people who were doing asset toolchain stuff, who were sort of fleeing Ruby land, Node was the natural place to go, and they built the stuff that they needed every day. They built it in Node. So CSS minification, transpilation, all of those sorts of things that your average web developer these days is just sort of taking for granted. They ended up being in Node, and therefore they ended up being in NPM. And so in reverse, all of these people who just needed those assets and didn't care about Node at all are turning up in Node land because they're like, this is how I do CSS. And then they find that NPM is there, and they're like, oh, this package JSON can let me do other stuff. And then they get into using NPM that way. But the weird thing is they don't think of themselves as Node developers at all. If they think of themselves as anything, they think of themselves as NPM users. Like, I use NPM, and I'm a front-end developer, and I write Python or Ruby or Go or something, which is really strange. But as long as you're doing that, we'll get out of your way and let you do it. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense, and that kind of dovetails into my next question. So, one line from the docs page for NPM and your mission statement is, when everyone else is adding force, we work to reduce friction. And I thought that was really interesting, and I just wanted, I was curious how that became a goal for your team and how you've worked towards that.
That specific line is really interesting. One of the things that Isaac and I have in common is that we both care a lot about writing, which we've found is a relatively rare quality in a programmer, somebody who also cares a lot about words. So that line was literally in January of 2014. I was like, oh my God, we need some copy for the jobs page. Can you just slap something together? And Isaac banged out a paragraph without thinking about it. And that line is golden. Everybody has mentioned that line. Everybody loves that line, and it has stuck there through every iteration of the job site since then. Because he was just without thinking about it, he was like, what is it that you do? It's like, I get out of their way. I'm not trying to teach you how to do something. I'm not trying to force a framework on you. I'm not trying to say, eat your vegetables, do it this way. I'm just trying to say that whatever it was you're trying to do, I'm going to try and make it easier.
Yeah.
And it's a really useful guiding principle for a piece of software, because as a team, we spend a lot of time writing a lot of Node, and so obviously we develop our own opinions. We're like, oh, you shouldn't do that, that's terrible. But it's very good to be able to go back to the guiding principle and say, we think that, but not everybody agrees with us, and it's not our job to tell people the way that they should write Node. We could be wrong. So we might write a blog post that says we think this is a good idea, but we're not going to say, and so NPM won't let you do it any other way anymore. That's never a thing we would do.
Yeah, well, in an age of a lot of opinionated frameworks and libraries in the JavaScript community, it's refreshing to see someone coming out, or a group coming out and saying, this is a tool and we're not trying to force opinions on you. This is just, to get out of your way, as you're saying.
That's kind of why it's become a sort of baseline tool on which all of the other tools are built, because the other tools are like, and it's fine. They've said, we're going to pick a set of opinions and go with it. And there's, dozens and dozens of them. And we've said, but everybody says this. We are like the lowest common denominator of stuff that everybody agrees that you should be able to do. You should be able to install stuff. Nobody disagrees. So we are the baseline, and it lets the other tools be smaller. It lets the other tools not have to have their own installer and their own updater and their own dependency manager. They can just do the thing that they can implement the opinions that they care about.
That makes total sense. So to pivot a little bit into more about culture, so I know you've talked a bit on the concept of inner source and how NPM is dedicated to inner source. So can you just speak a little bit to that?
Sure. how we found InnerSource. InnerSource was actually coined by Tim O'Reilly, I think, in like 2000. Is the first time he wrote about it. It was a long time ago. And we came across it quite recently. And we came across it because we were thinking about NPM Onsite, which is our sort of enterprise inside the firewall product. And we were basically trying to come up with an explanation of why people like it. Because everybody who tried it was like, this is great. But they weren't very specific about why it was great. They were just like, we like the tool. And we needed a way to be able to tell new users why you will like the tool other than those other people like it. And so we dug deeper, and what we found out was they liked it because it was exactly the same tool that they would have used if they were at home. If they were at home, they'd have used an open source tool. And it's interesting, it's sort of in retrospect obvious that the tools that you use at work, especially if you work at a large company, they're very seldom the same tools that you would use if you were just picking the tool yourself. And that's because the decisions aren't made by the same people. The person who's working at home is just picking the best tool for the job. And the person who is buying software for a company to use, that's never actually their number one priority. Their number one priority might be that it costs enough, or they have a contract with that vendor already, or they don't want to have to hire someone to like configure this weird open source thing. And so as soon as you come to that realization, as soon as you come to the realization that enterprise companies are not using the best tools for the job, you're like, why is that? How can we possibly fix that? So what we did was we went to the other major makers of open source tools. So we went to GitHub and Travis and Greenkeeper and Coveralls and all of these people, and said basically, why don't we make it as easy to use our tools as it is to use these, admittedly not as good enterprise tools that people seem to end up using right now? What is the difference? And a lot of the difference, in fact, is very basically, you need to be able to buy it. If you can buy it, the procurement department can understand that it's a thing that you can buy. And if you're paying for it, then you can do a bunch of the sort of tedious, busy work that enterprise software companies have to do. They have to fill out a feature checklist. They have to make statements about compliance. They have to do security audits. There's a bunch of boring and not fun stuff that enterprises in their own interests have to do. And if it's a purely open source tool, are never going to happen. Nobody working on an open source tool is going to go, well, what I feel like working on this weekend is a compliance checklist. That's never going to happen. So by being companies that can say, okay, we make this open source tool, but we also make this paid version, we will do all of the work necessary to package it up so you can use it inside your company. Suddenly you can use the tools that you would have been using anyway inside your company without a lot of friction.
That makes a lot of sense, and I've heard this at PayPal and companies that are sort of slowly starting to adopt more of the open source principles and InnerSource within them, and I think it leads to a lot of innovation, which is good. So to close out, what does community mean for NPM?
It means a ton of things. First off, it just means the vast number of people who contribute back to NPM. Every time somebody publishes a module, you have in some sense joined the NPM community, and there's like 250,000 modules as of yesterday, I think. And it's really fun seeing, you can appreciate intellectually, there are network effects. When you have a large group of people, they are greater than the sum of their parts. But as NPM just exponentially accelerates in use, you can see everybody is doing everything else. Everybody, every new tool is built on the top of 3 previous tools. Every tool is taking into account the mistakes the previous versions of those tools made. Every time they fork, the different forks take different opinions. And it's just accelerating as a result of everybody being able to work with everybody else very quickly. And the other thing that I think about when I think about community is how NPM is driving quality right now. If there's a website called node-modules.com, and it was really funny because people talk about how NPM search sucks, and this guy implemented node-modules.com, which absolutely blows our own search out of the water. It's fantastic, and it uses exactly one search metric, which is how many people follow that project on GitHub. Because it turns out the best possible metric of how good a piece of software is how many people care about that piece of software. So we're probably going to build that signal into our own search as fast as we possibly can, because it turns out the community knows
Yeah.
how good the modules are, and we don't need some crazy complicated algorithm to sort it out.
That's really cool. So stars matter.
Yes, it does.
Well, thanks so much for joining me today, Laurie.
Thanks.